marriage, and I lost him in September of last year. I got a call from someone who indicated he was from Medicare. They told me that they needed my Social Security number. They needed my bank account number for new Medicare cards. I told them I was not giving them the information and hung up the phone.
There were thousands of consumers affected by this scam. They told consumers that if they didn't provide this information, that they might lose their Medicare benefits, and they implied that that would happen pretty quickly.
They called back, and I continued to refuse to give them the information, but they would transfer me to someone else who would give me the same pitch they were giving me. I just wanted them off the phone. I gave them the information they wanted.
These telemarketers are professionals. They know what buttons to push. They know what to say to get people to provide their information. If you receive a call from a government agency, be very skeptical. Government agencies don't call consumers to ask them for money. They don't call consumers to ask for personal information.
I think it is very important that all of us continue to learn about scams.
Because of consumer complaints like the one we received from Dr. Bowers, we were able to go into federal court, get a freeze on the defendant's assets, and shut the company down.
I was so glad to even hear that they did win the case and shut the people down.
All right, looks like we have got about a minute to go before Carol's presentation, so we might as well get Carol on the screen here. And Carol, if you want to turn your mic and camera on and then get your PowerPoint all loaded up like you did before.
All right, I'm doing that. Here we go. Oh my goodness.
Great job.
Yes.
Okay. All right, well, it's 3:15, Barbara, so you can give Carol an intro. And
all right, sounds good. Carol, my pal from New York. Hi from New Jersey, way down. Carol, so kind of you to come back and do this again. I'd like to welcome Carol Hegeman. She is going to talk to us about grant writing, which every one of us should be on this call. So take it away, Carol.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. On my next slide, I wrote good morning because that, for some reason, I thought it was. I'm Carol Hegeman. I have a jam-packed session for you, and I really appreciate your being here in the afternoon after you've been here for a while. So it's my job to try to be both informational and entertaining for you, and I'll do my best. So just a little bit about me, so why you should be listening to me. I'm the co-author of the only book that I know of that is focused on grant writing for aging programs and services. I also have 30 years of experience in writing grants and aging, and I'm a vice president of a village. So here we go. How do I get, there we go.
There you go. Okay, yeah, sometimes the arrow key seems to work for me.
Well, my screen is cut off. You can't see my whole slide, or is that just me? Let me get rid of me. There we go.
We can see your whole slide, Carol. You're good to go.
Okay. So, thanks for attending. I'm going to set expectations really quickly. You know, I have 45 minutes, so in no way is this a grant writing workshop. It presents selected ideas for being savvy about grant writing for villages. It's ideal for staff and volunteers of villages with some grant writing experiences, and it's also fine for people who are novices. I think you'll get a lot out of it too. So our topics today, just as I said in the promotion for the session, is how to plan a process for writing a grant proposal, to understand the different roles of the grant writer and village board members in grant writing, and to learn the meaning of several different components of a grant proposal, plus tips for writing them. So planning grants, here's the worst thing you can do, folks. Just sit down and start writing, as if you were writing a college final exam. You have to plan your grants in advance before you put pencil to paper. What I suggest you do is to use a planning abstract to get your thoughts on challenges and barriers and on the idea itself before you write. So what is this planning abstract? It's a 1 to 3 paragraph of what you think the grant will be about that's easily shared with others. Now, I have one on the next page. I also hope you have my handouts I sent, because they have those in a full page version. So here's an example. Pleasant City Villages proposes a project to help members of seniors in Pleasant City age in place in their own homes by establishing a free nurse consulting service. I just picked that. It could be anything else, of course. The consulting service will provide wellness checks, and then there's a space for somebody to write in, how often would we do this? And how many would we give? And 2 times a month and where? And then it asks, what barriers and challenges do you see if we pursue this grant? Now we're going to stay here a second, and I'm going to ask a couple of questions. If I had more time, we would go into dialogue about this, but we won't. So I'm going to ask the question and I'm going to answer it. All right. Who should be asked to comment on this? And of course, you might say, oh, well, certainly the board, that's right, you know, the agency. Sure. It should be some selected members. Yes. But it shouldn't only be your most active members. It might be some of the more quiet members who don't normally participate, and you might learn something about what they think about it. You're also using a nurse consulting service. So you really want to talk with something like the VNA or another home care agency or your local hospital. Okay, and if that's kind of a good idea of who you want to look at it. Now, my next question is, why did I put blanks in there? Why didn't I just tell them what I thought? And there's just a little trick to this. I think how human beings think is that if you hand them a nicely written, fully clear 3 paragraphs, they have no option but to say, gee, Carol, that was really nice. Go right ahead. That's the last thing you want. You want them to feel that they have a role in this. And by asking them to fill the blanks, they will have a role and you'll get some ideas. Now, my last question is, what's the most important question in here? And it's, what barriers and challenges do you see if we pursue this grant? I don't care how smart you are. You can't think of anything. And this is the ideal way to get this before you put your idea in writing. If you wait till after it's half done, you may find out that these people who advise you have different ideas and you're going to have to start over. So you do that now. Now, that was my first section. Now it's the different roles of a grant writer and a board member. And in all the years I've been writing grants, doing grant training, I've never devoted some time to this. And I was really glad I did it. And what comes out is that if you're if you're both a grant writer and a board member, you must strive to complete the roles of both. So an effective grant writer is more than a good writer who answers the questions on the RFP. It's a little bit frustrating to be a grant writer and hear people say, oh, well, you know, Mary Jones has a BA in English, so she'll write the grant for us. Well, yeah, he or she should have good grammar skills and good writing ability, but it's so much more than that. An effective grant writer, and this is really important, is a marketer and a planner. A marketer? Sure, you're not writing this to get a grade, and everyone, unless your professor's marking on a curve, either your answers are right or wrong. You are competing with other people who are writing grants. Often they may be other villages. They may often be other agencies in aging. So you have to make the grant reviewer like your proposal better than anyone else. And that's why you're a marketer. So what does the marketer do? The marketer is the one who sets the case for your agency to win. And a village is great at that. You can say there is no other agency like the village around who engages seniors helping seniors, who trains people, provides services. We're unique in what we do. And you get that point clear. You're saying basically a village is special and it's different from other places. And you write that in some way so that's clear. And when you talk about being a planner, I'm not talking at this moment about planning the grant. I'm talking about planning your time when you write the grant. You don't necessarily write in sequence, especially for grant writers. You already know that the first thing you need to do is to do a grant abstract. What do you do secondly? You look through the whole grant proposal without writing a thing. You also look, if you're lucky enough to get this, the criteria for what is being funded. So you know that when you market the grant, you hit every one of those points. You also think of your sequencing then. What do you write next? For villages only, I think you know the needs of your community because you've done all this work in getting your 501c3 and your business plan. You can pretty much write that a little bit later. But first you'll have to get your goals and objectives out there. That's really important because that will guide you. And you have to run that through other people again. You also, and this may sound funny, you want to get your financial manager in early. You can give him or her the planning abstract. And if they're like finance officers I've always had that say, come back to me when you have the grant and I'll run the numbers for you. But you don't want that. You want their advice early so you know whether you're going to be over budget or under budget. So here's your language and planning to get input from the finance planner, your marketing person. Ask them, what cost centers do you see for this grant? Then you're speaking their language and they're able to give you advice earlier than you would. Okay, the roles of the board member in grant writing. If you're writing the grant and you're not a board member and the board members not help you, good luck. But if that happens, it's your job also to see that the grant proposal is achievable. The person writing the grant is always motivated to make the goal and the activities as big and as strong as possible. So an example I gave that, oh, we will engage 80% of our members in the wellness program and 50% of them will have, will be able to say that they felt that their wellness ability is better. You know, I think that's asking too much, and most board members will. So you want to be careful that the grant writer is setting goals that are achievable. Now, unless, I don't know if we have anyone listening in from the big Boston Foundation, that's village, that's Beacon Hill. That's kind of the mother of us all. They can write grants that complement the core of the village and don't worry about interfering with us with it. But for most of us are small, we want to be sure that you don't get too far away from the core mission of the village. For example, you might be able to get a grant to do an art show of your members. Well, that's great. But look at the third point, the third check mark. The board members should make sure that it's not going to cost more in dollars and human effort than you're going to get back. There's an important term here, and it's called opportunity costs. That's an economic term. It means if your volunteers and staff are spending more time on something like an art program that would be better used on the core visions of your program, you're using your opportunity costs badly. So there's really a lot to think about if you're the grant writer, if you're a board member in grant writing, and you want to be sure through that planning abstract that that person is on, the writer is in sync with all of this. Okay, here's the first vision I want you to remember from my workshop. There are 2 or 3. Put another way, board members should avoid this scenario. Think of your village. If you're like mine, you're a small village. You've been around for a little while, but you're certainly not there yet. You have a little boat of a village. You don't want to get a grant that's going to, a fish in terms of fish, that's going to jump there and sink you. Okay, that's another way of saying what I've been saying all along about planning carefully. Okay, planning components. Here's what's in most grants: an abstract or an executive summary. The executive summary is a longer version of the abstract. The abstract is just the planning summary, all prettied up and with what you finally decided you're going to do. Your statement of need. Why is this program needed? And I'll come back and talk about that some more. Outcome goals and objectives are pretty obvious. Work plan and methodology. I'm going to be back with a couple of tips for you on these. But also, there's often an evaluation, and there's something called logic models. This has come up, it's maybe 12, 15 years now. And it's a graphic depiction of your grant logic. And it's really neat, but I can't cover it in the amount of time I have. But I want to spend time on corporate capability. Here's where a lot, I've also reviewed grants at the federal and state level. And here's where people miss the boat. They say, oh, good, that's easy. All we say is that we're a 501c3, we're incorporated here, we have so many members, we have 6 board members, we've done these projects. Well, any other village in the world and almost any other nonprofit in aging is going to have those factoids there. It tends to put a grant reviewer to sleep. Make your time in the corporate capability, including all those basics I said. Why are you good at that? So this is when you come in and say, for example, using the model I gave you about the wellness program, you say the board member who will supervise this project is a retired professor of gerontology or is a retired doctor of geriatrics. Oh, well, your corporate capability has taken a big leap. Do you get my drift? You make sure you play into your corporate capability section what you do. And the budget is the budget. You do not pad your budget excessively. That's probably the most common question I add, but you do ask for a bit more than you asked for. Okay, now we're going to do some tips on these points. Tip 1 is you need an evidence base in your needs assessment. And an evidence base means that you use scientific data to prove the need for your project. If you've ever written a grant to the Corporation on National and Community Service, they are very big on this. Scientific data, you may be thinking they're saying, me? No, scientific data, no, we don't have that. All right, not possible? Use whatever data you have, but prove your need in some tangible way. So for example, let's take this wellness program again. Before you started writing the grant, you should have surveyed your members and see how many of them don't see his doctors as much as they'd like because it wasn't convenient, and they would love to have a once a month wellness program done by a local nurse. Well, she'll do that. And you can write that up and say, we surveyed our members and 85% think this project will help them. Is that hard scientific evidence? No, but it is something tangible that gives you some evidence that your project will be good. And for the grants, most of us write for our villages at this point, it will be enough. Here's a way to see this a little more clearly. In your needs assessment, this first sentence, if I were reading this grant review in your needs assessment without backup, would give you 0 points on it. Our village members are getting older. Woohoo! So is everybody else. It's much more useful to give data. Look at my second quote. 80% of our village members are 80 plus. Okay, that's kind of good. But look how much better the rest of the sentence makes it. 80% of our members are 80 plus, 20% higher than the average age of seniors in our county. And you give a citation. All of a sudden, your fact, your statement of need is backed up by evidence. I hope that makes that point clear. It's really important that you do that. I am guilty of repeating this. This is the third time I'm doing grant writings for this wonderful organization. And each time I've used this tip, and I'm sorry if you've heard it before, but you cannot hear it enough. You should, in my opinion, you should not be writing any grant that seeks money to support social activities for your members without it. And you probably can quote it with me. Individuals with adequate social relationship have a 50% greater likelihood of survival compared to those with poor or insufficient relationships. This magnitude is comparable to quitting smoking. And below that, I've given you the official citation. This is a major professional study, which makes it so much more impressive when you, a little village, comes out and can cite it. Tip 3 for goals and objectives. Focus on member and or societal needs, not the need of your organization. No, 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 no. Do not write, our goal is to get more brochures because we can't pay for printing. You know what? Who cares? Nobody's interested in that. But you need more brochures and you can't pay for printing. So what do you write? A recent community survey shows that 70% of isolated communities are unaware of our services. Therefore, our goal is to increase our marketing plan. Okay, this one's, I'm going to skip this one in terms of having more time. Go back to your mission statement when you create a goal. It will give you some ideas because you probably worked forever in getting that mission statement down. Tip 3, it's another little graphic that tells you a lot. If you're writing small grants like to banks or to little small communications, you might not have a complex evaluation to write. They might say, for example, that you wanted to increase your membership from 50 to 80 or from 100 to 150 through more marketing. And all you have to do is said, we started out with 50 after the marketing campaign, we had 100, you're home free. But if you're doing a more complicated grant and they want to see the efficacy of what you've achieved, you go to your board and you ask who among us has a friend in our local community college, in our local college, who teaches grad students or seniors doing a final paper, and they need to do a practicum. They might design your evaluation for you. They might evaluate it for you. They might even help you do your needs assessment by doing a study. It works out very great if you can get that. And lastly, okay, I'm doing great on time. I think I will be able to take questions and answers. Yes. Lastly, key tips on funding. This was not in my description, but I made a safe bet that you'd be interested in hearing it. Okay, for most of us, especially the newer grants, especially if you're going for grants just to give you some operating money, you want to look at banks, you want to look at community foundations, and you want to look at corporations. Now, a lot of them will say, we do not fund operating expenses. So you word it differently. You say we're seeking funds to increase our membership. As part of doing that, you would need the operating costs of doing some of your marketing. So how do you find banks? The easiest thing to do is to walk into your local bank and ask the bank manager if they have a foundation, how you could apply. I'll tell you a trick that I found, much to my embarrassment. One bank who's been funding our village for the past 2 years and be giving us very little money, I finally made a phone call and saying, what are we doing wrong? And she said, well, you know, there are a lot of grants, blah, 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 blah. But she said, you know, you might consider having a bank account with us. So if you're going to go to a bank, see if you can have your bank account there. One of the things you can also do, if you don't want to leave your current bank, if your current bank is not giving you some kind of grant, you might consider switching. If you don't want to switch, maybe you want to have a separate bank account for your funding and grant needs. It might help. Now, what's really neat is that some banks' applications are simple. I get $500 a year by writing a 1.5-page letter. The other foundation, you know, the banks that give us 4-digit numbers have a more complicated application, but it's generally much easier than writing to a standard foundation. Sometimes the bank will give you straight donations. You don't even have to do a report on it, and therefore it can be used for fundraising. So how do you find these community foundations? Go to the web and remember my graphic about the fish sinking the boat. This is just important. TGCI stands for the Grantmanship Center Information.com funding sources. This is, in my opinion, a fantastic source for being learning all about grant writing. Spend some time scrolling around the site. If you're looking for foundations, eventually, and takes a little while to find it, be patient. You'll find a map of the United States. You can click on that state, your state, and then it will click on your area and it will tell you all the community foundations in your area. Or you can simply Google your area. Say you're from Kalamazoo. Put in your browser Kalamazoo Community Foundations and see what you find. Oops. Okay, I wanted to go ahead and talk a little bit about what was in corporate foundations. It's the same thing. You go here and do your community foundations. Give me a minute here, please. Okay, now about me. I wanted to know, I do have a book called Grant Writing for Aging Services and Programs. It's a 208-page book available to conference attendees at $15 a copy. And I am so grateful to the Village Network for letting me promote. Usually when you go to a national conference, they make you pay your own way, they make you pay your transportation, and that you can't say that you have a book you want to sell. So this is just great. I'm the Vice President of Neighbors of Northern Columbia County in upstate New York. I'm an award-winning grant writer in aging for over years. I'm a national trainer on grant writing, and it may not matter to you, but I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer. And in my experience, running a village is kind of like being a Peace Corps volunteer. You're learning about the community, you're learning how to serve. And it's, never mind, sorry. Here's my email. It's chathome@gmail.com. I think the most common question I get in the chat is, what again? What was your email? It's chathome@gmail.com. And you may contact me. I might not get back to you ready. I'm checking my time here. Okay. What's in the book? I'm going to let you read that for yourself. And here is your order form for getting it. And again, you can get this in full page size. And now I have my 15 minutes for question and answer. Okay. Before I'm going to look in the, if I can find it in the chat box. Whoops. What happened? Well, it doesn't matter. We're on questions and answers now. I just need to find the chat box. I'm going to ask you only one thing. If your question is just specific to your own village, please don't ask it here. There's only a little bit of time left. So go ahead and ask your questions now. Where is my chat function?
I'm here, so
got it.
Carol, all right. So we have Dottie Jeffries who wants to ask your question. Dottie, go ahead and unmute.
Carol, can you speak to resources such as, I live in Chicago, such as the library at the Donors Forum, Chicago, and I believe there's some other foundation research libraries across the country as a resource for searching funding opportunities.
Dottie, that is a great suggestion. And since I wasn't going to talk about fundraising at all in the beginning, I didn't include it. Dottie is absolutely right. And Chicago people are so lucky. They have a really great group that meets together. I know a lot of people there, even though I'm from New York. The other thing you can do is go to your state library. They have an online and in-person resources on grant writing. Thank you, Dottie, so much for adding that. That was a great point.
Carol, can you send the order form? Is it a digital or a?
I did send it to you.
Oh, so we have it in our files. Okay.
You have it in your files, yes. I'll be happy to send it again. That's
no, that's all right. If Travis probably has it in the Google file. But people are asking to post it again. So we'll just, it's hard to post on this because you can't really do it. So we will put it in for everybody in the forms so that everybody can see.
So you're welcome to use that email, that chathome@gmail.com. I can just mail you the order form. That's not a great deal of trouble. So we can do that.
So I know I have other questions. I'm gonna ask a quick question. The villages that are starting out, you know, I was always told you have to have 2 years under your belt to be in operation to actually, you know, be considered. That's a myth. So that's why I want you to address that, please.
Yeah, we got grants early on. We were very lucky. In general, that's true, but you can, many foundations will not do startups. They don't want to throw potentially good money after unknown foundations, which is why I'm talking about your local banks. They are vested in your community and they will see it. And local community, you start small. And then when you have, you know, a $500 grant from this bank and the little community foundation gave you $750, when you begin writing, said, even though we're new, we already have 2 funders. And you don't necessarily have to tell them, you know, they may ask you, but you tell them that you have the 2 grants. So yes, you cannot go to well-established foundations. That's not a total myth. But you can, particularly for the places I recommended locally, you can begin. And you can say, we're looking for some startup and support money, but don't look helpless. You say, we already have our 501c3. You cannot start a grant without a 501c3. And you say through that, we have a mission statement, we have a plan, we started recruiting members. You want to be at that level. You don't want to come and say, well, we want to do a grant, we want to get a 501c3. You know, that's too early. But once you are operational, even though you're very new and you have something to report on, you can say we went from 0 members to 30 in 6 months. That's awesome.
Okay, great.
Wait,
Melissa.
I need to say one thing. As 10 grant writers will have 25 different opinions, like anyone else. So just be prepared to have somebody argue with me on that. But that's my opinion.
Okay, well, we appreciate that. Alyssa in Lancaster asked, when we consider what the ask is too big of a fish for a village, do you have a standard percentage of the village's overall budget? Hold on, that just moved. To consider, i.e., like a village that has a 50K annual budget shouldn't request a grant larger than ... Do you have a?
There's no rule about that, but this is a common sense question. If that's all, people, as a grant reviewer, I don't review budgets. That's not my expertise. My co-author is the expert on that area. But when I do review them, if you have a $50,000 budget, you have probably no business at this point asking for more than 10,000, 15. That would be a lot. In terms of they're investing in you and you're little and you grow. There's no hard and fast rule with that, but if you ask me to make my guess on it, that's what I'd say. That's a great question, by the way.
Thank you. One in the question and answer from Iris. I've been told by local aging providers that California's Cali's community foundations are not funding aging programs. Any thoughts or advice? Which is a good question. I heard that too.
Yes, that's a great question. And in other, when I do my full workshop, I go into that. it was so hard cutting it down. I use the concept called reframing. So they're not funding aging. However, look at the example I gave you, a wellness program. So you don't call it aging, you call it aging health promotion programs. And it happens to be for aging people. You might be able to do that. Suppose you're looking for an activities program. The environmental movement grants are huge. And they don't fund aging, but they might fund an intergenerational program in which your members work with local school kids to clean up local parks and to do information. So you reframe your grants into something else, into what they do frame. And that can sometimes work. But remember what I said about not getting too far away from your core mission. And by the way, only about 5% of the funders that exist fund in aging. That's a depressing fact, but it's the rule. But it's why it makes funding, of reframing a little bit, a very important concept.
Okay. Susan Decker asks, do you think foundations consider the percentage of funds coming from members' individual donations as an indication of local interest?
Percentage of funds?
Funds.
Oh, yes. You can ask for matching funds. They very often, I didn't do the budget section. Your matching funds are important. If you have that $50,000 budget, which is more than it's a good startup budget. If you can say that we already have, of that $15,000, 20,000 of that a donation from community members, you are showing community support. It is a wonderful thing to add.
Okay, great. Diane Lavoie said, we are considering setting up a fund that members and other local residents can apply for funds for a certain home modifications. What can you say about seeking a grant for creating such a fund?
I love it. And I know there are some places you should go right away. This is where you go to corporate grants. You go to your Home Depot. I haven't researched them recently, but you should look at your Home Depot, all those big box stores, and they may not they might donate in-kind funds. You can also go back to local communities. Very often banks have community service days, and they will have people work on home modification programs. This is near and dear to my heart, because when I was in my old job, I did a big grant in which college students formed a union with area home care agencies, and they did home modifications. They selected home modifications. They did it over the summer. They used funds donated by the communities. So there are lots, it's just a very good way to do that. And that's reframing.
Excellent. Any parting comments? We're winding down. Any other, I don't have any more questions out there floating. So again, Carol Hegeman, if you look in the chat, which we'll capture, is her email. We have one more message. Hold on. Oh, Diane said thank you. Thank you, Carol, for very insightful and necessary part of our village life. So we appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. I love the village. All you guys there. Thanks.
Oh, anytime.
Great. All right. Okay, so this is perfect timing, and we've got Michael Marcus right on cue. And Michael, if you want to test out your PowerPoint, we can, there we go.
There you go.
Looking good.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, Barbara,
Hi, folks. Hi, Carol. How are you?
Hi. I think Carol dropped off. I don't think she's in there anymore. But
she's in the audience now.
She's in the audience now.
Carol, you should tell me if I ever declined any of your proposals when I was working for any of the foundations that I worked for, right there, so you know who you're talking to, who's talking at you.
I'm not going to introduce you, Michael. You're already all over it. So I know, and I'm going to give you enough time to talk about yourself. We are so appreciative of you coming.
1 minute.
And take it away. It's all yours, hon.
So I am really appreciative of your having me, Barbara. You know, my friend Peter Kenyon, who is a fellow ABCD Institute steward. We now call ourselves stewards, not faculty anymore. And I had a wonderful conversation about his presentation at the in-person conference a couple of years ago. So I was flattered to follow up on Peter's presentation. I think I know a bunch of people who are on today. Some of you know that I was the program director for the Villers Foundation, which is now Families USA. Some of you know I came in when Carol was talking about community foundations. Some of you know that I was the head of basic human needs funding for the Chicago Community Trust. Followed that with a small family foundation called the Roberta Ball Trust. I was senior program director for Aging the Harry Jeanette Weinberg Foundation. So those are my jobs. I think some of you know that I was also the founder of Grant Makers in Aging, which is the association of funders in the field of aging. I feel like I'm inviting questions about grant making, and that's not what I'm here for. Grant pursuing, proposal writing. By the way, the term of art is not grant writing, it's proposal writing. The foundations make the grants, you're doing proposals. I was board member of American Society on Aging, which many of you know. I was treasurer of Generation Jeanette, and now I have the great honor of being on the board of Generations Online. So that's who you're getting in this. Many of you know, and I'm sure you know, that the foundations know that villages are nonprofits. And what are some of the things nonprofits need to be successful? Well, of course, you need financial health or a path to financial health. You need a big picture view. Where are you going with the village? You also need to know what your board is about, or who the people who are participating in decision-making roles are about. We're going to talk about some of those things, but I thought today most of what I was going to talk about was how to identify assets and know how to use those assets as part of the work that you're actually doing, how to map them, and how to walk out of here with a tool called action analysis, which gives you a sense of how to use those assets into the future. So what we're going to talk about for the most part are asset-based community development. There's a joke I make with boomers, but I'm not going to do it here. What's a community? Well, certainly villages, community. It's a group of people who identify and support one another, no matter where they are, no matter the frame that they happen to be in. Villages tend to be geographic in nature, but not always. Some communities are online. Most of us participate now in some sort of online community. A village is the epitome of a community. And that's because in a village, as I understand, it's people who identify and support one another. It's the notion of mutuality. And that's what you're building on, is the whole notion of mutuality. The dilemma we face in any kind of community is whether or not we look at the deficiencies and the needs, or the assets that individuals bring to the community itself, the assets and the capacities that people have. When I first made this slide, I was able to make it drip, but I can't remember how to do that any longer, so please forgive me. When we think about neighborhoods, very often, what we do is we think about them in this kind of a context. We look at it in terms of what's wrong. Villages don't do that. And that's one of your great assets to begin with. You look at, what do you have? Much of the work that's been done around an asset-based approach were done by these two guys, Jody Kretzmann on sort of the, if you're looking at on the left side of the picture, and John McKnight at the right. Many of you have seen this book, Building Communities from the Inside Out. It's a seminal text of the field. I just found one of my copies the other day, and I had written all over it, and I was fortunate to have John actually write all over mine. If we think about a community, any community, in terms of the assets that are there, we have a whole different picture that's in front of us. And that picture has, of course, individuals at the heart of it, but it also has those things that make a community really a community. I was once at a meeting shortly after the welfare to work legislation was released by the Clinton administration, and there were probably 200 or 300 people. There was the Harold Washington Library in Chicago. There was a very conservative congressperson there, and he was speaking to the whole question, and he was talking about a neighborhood in Chicago called Austin, and I think there are a couple of folks on the line who know Austin. And this congressperson, who was not from Chicago, but was from the south suburbs, far south suburbs, kept characterizing Austin as a neighborhood without any assets at all. At the time, the president of the YWCA was in the room. She raised her hand. She said, well, Mr. Congressperson, what do you actually know about Austin? Have you ever been there? Oh, no, I've never been there. She said, well, I live there and I'm president of the YWCA. And I know that we recently did an asset map of Austin. And we found over 3,000 community organizations that were there. And there were everything from a poetry society to bicycle repair organization to community gardening to churches. She offered to take him out there to this wilderness that he was calling Austin, but he never showed up. Each community's heart, as you saw before, is made up of individual gifts. Each village and each community has individuals with gifts that can be shared with that community, with that particular village. And break down into roughly 3 kinds of categories. I like to add a 4th, I'll get to that in a minute. Gifts of the head, stuff that you know about, that you enjoy talking about, and things that you might know how to do. I happen to know how to put together a PowerPoint. That may be my only marketable skill. Gifts of the hands, things that you can do. You know, my dad was a plumber, and so you might trust me with fixing your toilet. I learned that from him. But don't trust me with your electricity. I'll burn down your house. Gifts of the heart, things that you care about deeply. Children, older adults in the community, social policy of all sorts are things that can be really important. And the final gift is the gift of being human. We're social animals. As humans, we pull each other together. Labeled people have gifts themselves, which are often undervalued or ignored. And we've all seen lists like this before. And those are the people that we call problems. But have you ever gone to a homeless shelter where you see other homeless folks serving each other? There's a great story about a homeless shelter in Cincinnati in the Over the Rhine neighborhood, in which they said to the volunteers from the local churches and civic groups not to show up for a few months and see what the folks who used the shelter could do. And sure enough, after 3 months, it was the homeless folks who were running the shelter. Somebody playing the piano during meals, homeless folks cooking the meals for each other. And that changed the future for everybody at that particular shelter. One of the asset areas, so their assets come from individuals. Assets also come from associations. Associations, community associations, and villages, certainly of those, are voluntary interactions between 2 or more people. And we all know these groups. all of the neighborhoods that you work and live in, we all work and live in, have something that looks like this. And they are assets that can be used by your village to move forward. So what is an association? Well, it's two or more citizens joined together around the common activity, a village. Individuals join by choice. They achieve consensus by working together, and they thrive on connectors. My bet is almost everybody in this room in this conference is a connector or something like that. Connector doesn't even necessarily need to be a human. This is my dog, Jackson. Jackson passed away early yesterday morning. But I have a story about Jackson. Some years ago, I would walk Jackson very early morning in a local park. We lived on a street where there was a lot of traffic. People were using it to bypass the local stoplights. And we noticed that, and we tried really hard to get enough signatures to get the city to use traffic calming devices on the particular street. One morning, I walked down to the local park with Jackson, and people started talking about the traffic on the street. I pulled out my petition, and sure enough, among all the folks that I connected with, because of Jackson, we got enough signatures to get traffic calming devices in that neighborhoods. So what would you look for in a neighborhood connector? Or it's probably someone who's helped you put together or is engaged in putting village together that you work for, you work with, you're part of. They're people who are gift-centered, who are well-connected. People in their neighborhood love them. For some years, when I was working for the Villers Foundation, we worked in New Bedford, Massachusetts. And there we worked with the Cape Verdean community, by and large Portuguese-speaking, Portuguese patois, Portuguese Creole kind of community. And they had what they called, and I don't remember the word in Portuguese, but they had what they called the daily news. These tended to be older women who knew everything that was going on, but they were the ones who were able to pull the community together. They're connectors, as you are all connectors. There are, of course, in every community that you work in, that villages are in, are institutions. Institutions have gifts as well that they can lend to the larger community. What are they? When we think about them, they're paid groups of people who are generally professionals or hired for some professional role. We're structured they're structurally organized so that there's generally a hierarchy that we can follow to the top. And you know what they are. You see them all. There's often a conversation about whether or not churches or synagogues or mosques, places of worship, are local institutions, and they might be. There are two ways for institutions to meet needs that people might have, right? And you know this. One is service delivery, which is often top-down, focused on the needs, so that sort of focused on those deficits, and it often goes one way down. The other is community action. And very often what we want to do is we want to nudge institutions into engaging the community action effort. One of the wonderful things that distinguishes villages is that you act so much like associations, that there's so much voluntary work going on. There's real reciprocity that takes place. There's a holistic way to think about the larger community. Then, of course, there's the physical space, right? There are the parks that I mentioned before. There's this physical space that all of these might have available to be used for gatherings or for serving folks, might be in homes. You know, once, some years ago, when I was working for the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation, we did site visits to a number of supported communities. And I think people on here know what supported communities are. They're an Israeli version of villages that have a somewhat different structure, both mutuality, but also defined benefits that people get. And we were taken to meet folks who were participating in some support communities. We went to 4 site visits that they all happened to be in Arab villages with a small v. And all of them offered us food. So in the first one, we went to a community school where we ate breakfast. In the second one, we went to a senior center where we were offered a second breakfast. I feel like I'm in the Lord of the Rings. In the third place we went to, again, another community school where we were offered lunch. And finally, in the last place we were invited to a family's home. It was a fairly big home. And there were about 20 pairs of older women sitting with their daughters, all of whom would cook. This would make meal number 4. The thing that impressed me was they were able to get all of these younger and older women sitting together and staring at the 3 of us who were trying to eat all this food that we had been offered. But what was fascinating was they all saw this apartment as their home in the community itself. Physical space is someplace that we often see, but we need to have a vision for. We can think about that vision by just looking and staying for a moment. Think about what can we use this space for? If we have different glasses on and we're engaged in community development, we might see it like this, by putting on new sorts of eyes. But we also might see as being places where people can gather, right? And a village, big V, can be part of that particular movement. Finally, and I think in this, villages are really good about that, are really good about this piece, is to engage in exchange in the local economy. So every place has some sort of exchange in local economy taking place. Foundations that Carol was talking about very often are a result of that local economy, which is one of the reasons, by the way, you should be supporting the local economy. Nonprofits like villages, institutions, associations are part of a market for goods and services. In each one, there is some sort of exchange taking place. That exchange can be part of the assurance of permanency for your village by thinking about how you engage in that local economy in a significant way. Some years ago, while working in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, we discovered that a local supermarket sold more turkeys at Thanksgiving time to older adults than any other organization, any other store in the larger community itself. By going to that supermarket and saying, hey, you're supporting all these older adults in your community are buying their turkeys from you every year. You make more money in that particular group than anybody else in the larger community. How about contributing to meals that were served, to helping people keep their homes more effectively, to providing over-the-counter medications at a discount? All of that, which I'm sure many of you do, is part of ensuring the future of that particular community and the people who are participating in that community. For many low-income communities, older adults are, as you know, not just a part of the local economy, but very often it's the only assured part of that economy. They're the folks who get Social Security checks, who receive Medicare benefits, which allow others to stay in business, a business which can contribute back to how you have the funds continue the work that you're doing. Some of the best pie I've ever had was pie I got for exchanging snow shoveling in the south side of Milwaukee with people in the community, with older women actually, who were giving me pie for my snow shoveling services. I think a lot of people on here know what community supported agriculture is, but it's an example of exchange, right? That people share ownership of a farmer's field, and in exchange for that, they get a guaranteed box of food, one sort or another, through weekly deliveries. Actually, this morning, my next door neighbor went and got our CSA box so I could finish doing this PowerPoint for you. This is the younger brother of a faculty member of the ABCD Institute. He is a farmer that produces these tomatoes in his backyard in San Juan. This happens to be a farmer's market in the Fells Point neighborhood of Baltimore. Most of the farmers here, with the exception of the bananas, but most of the farmers here are local residents who do their farming in their backyard. They're involved in community exchange. If you begin to think about community exchange, you come up with a different kind of community map. Where does who live where and is able to contribute? I'm sure many of you are thinking about that as you put together, as you support the village that you're part of. So, and finally, every community has culture, stories, history that pull it together. The stories that we have are people about how the community came together, who talks to who, how they grew, who's been marginalized but can contribute to the larger community itself. What are the cultural traditions that you might have in that particular neighborhood during COVID, during the pandemic? My neighborhood, like a lot of the neighborhoods you're part of, took on their own traditions. We now meet every single weekend. Every Friday or Sunday evening, we get together. This past weekend was particularly difficult for us because of our ailing older dog. So we didn't have time to go shopping. We didn't have time to produce food. Instead, our neighbors who met every Friday evening came together and provide my wife and I with food to make it through the weekend itself. So what do you do with all this information you probably already have? Well, you can come up with a list of the assets that you know of and may be helpful for your particular village, right? And here's some tools for collecting those. We're going to talk about 3: asset mapping, which I'm sure many of you have heard of in the past, a gifts inventory, how do you collect those assets, and finally, action analysis. When we think about asset mapping, we think about it in the terms of the assets that I just listed. And they can look something like this, right? We can begin to think about, can we put them into slices of the pie that make up the community? Here's something that we can copy, and actually I'm going to send this PowerPoint to Barbara, to Steve, so that they can share it if you care to, and you can make use of it. Here's a way to sort of think through and fill this out so that you can think through what it is, what those assets might be as you're working on. So how do you identify and map the assets when you get home? I think in this slide, I was assuming we're doing an in-person conference. So forgive me, I forgot that we were doing this virtually. Well, first thing you should know is you should know why you're doing that. Not just be doing it because you're looking for the way the assets fit together. Have a plan for compiling and updating the results. It's best done in your community. And what it isn't going to be, it isn't going to be a guaranteed way for you to actually pull up assets. You have to work at it a little bit. I'm sorry about this, about the captions. They were bigger than I thought they were going to be. They're bigger than what I thought they were going to be. We'll go back to them in a second. This is a particularly good book, How to Build a Community, which has some, which you can get from the Asset-Based Community Development Institute, ABCD Institute, online. And they actually have some gift surveys. So what's a gift survey? Give me a second, hit the wrong button. What's a gift survey, right? They're really conversation starters, and they're really 3 questions that you're asking. What do you value about this community? What do you want to see this community become? And what are you willing to give this community? Or you can change the word community to village. And this is assuming that you're going outside your village network, that you're going to the larger community itself. So how do you do that? I was working once, some years ago in Steele County, Minnesota. And if we were in a room together, I'd ask people to raise their hands, tell me if you knew where Steele County was. Steele County is the southeast corner of the state of Minnesota. And it's got about 35,000 people in it. The capital, the county seat is Owatonna, Minnesota, where about 25 or 30,000, those 35,000 people live in. We were working, my colleague John Migliaccio and I were working together on an asset-based community development project in the county on behalf of the county's Office of Health and Human Services. We were in a town called Blooming Prairie. Do you love that name, Blooming Prairie? And their neighboring town, Edenville. The only real industry in Edenville and Blooming Prairie was Steve's Meats, which was a place that made sausage and shipped it around to the rest of the country. We were asked to help them think through how they could connect the Blooming Prairie and Edenville more closely with Owatonna, where most of the local clinics were, health clinics were. Edenville had about 2,500 residents. The average head of household age was in their mid-50s, and they had lost their regular transportation from the county. It was a bus that went a couple of times a day that the county paid for. So through doing a survey, they began to meet people in the county itself. And what did they discover after they did this survey, when they began to think about assets and began to map the assets that they had? The assets, what they were able to do is they were able to determine that, that the Boy Scouts had an old bus that they hardly ever use, that the new Lutheran minister had been a bus mechanic before he went to ministry school, and this strayed into real controversial territory. There had been 10 new houses built in Edensville. All of them were full of people who had recently moved there, and they were just shocked. They discovered that one of the new emigres had been a bus driver from St. Paul, and they ended up with their own bus service. So one of the things that you want to do while doing this is to ask people to describe their community. What is it that they would describe the strengths? What do they see describes how they want to see the community or village become? And if you had a magic wand, what would you do? So you end up with a picture of what your village can and should become, which is, of course, what the larger community could and should become. How to get there. And this is what I think people have been thinking about when I said how to ensure your future. What I call action analysis. So this comes from the original notion of force field analysis. Again, if we were in person, I'd ask people if they've heard of force field analysis. It was a product of a guy named Kurt Lewin, who gave us transactional analysis and asked, for those of you who remember, this was an actual contribution. What force field analysis really did was look at the larger picture in which you exist, in which your village exists. Think about who it is that you might be competing with for access to assets. It's not unlike what Carol was describing when she asked you to think about what other choices foundations might have when they're going to do grant making, something I'd be happy to talk to you about. Then list what those forces are that you might be dealing with that are for and against proposed change, which in this case is the existence, the continued existence of the villages that you all are part of. Look for the larger picture. What are those forces that impact change? What are the pros and cons of those? Some of them may be less than what you think they are. Some of them may be greater. And what is it that can help you reduce the impact of the forces which oppose the growth of the village that you're part of, and help you develop an action plan to implement change itself? And determine if the proposed change can get support. Would it be supported not just by foundations, but by service providers, other institutions, the local government, local commercial outlets, businesses, schools, senior centers, churches, all those folks we suggested before, and to suggest steps which can reduce obstacle strength or increase your own strength. And we put those in terms of how to. Remember, in describing this session, what I called it was how to. So how do you make fresh, nutritious food a priority for the residents? And I happen to be working on a large indigenous intergenerational food project in the Reno, Nevada area. So one of the questions I asked is how to make fresh, nutritious food more available to residents of Reno, Nevada. In this case, it was indigenous people, Native Americans, older adults among whom felt better when they ate the historic foods that they were used to. How to do that? Grow them. Find places to grow them and distribute them. What are the things that are working against that happening? Access to land, access to seeds, access to water. But what is it that can help you get there? Are the forces valid? How do you know they're valid? Are the strengths significant, forces significant? What can be altered? What can't be altered? Know what your change can be. And here's a worksheet. This will guide you, literally, to strengthening your village. It's how to. What do you want to do? Do you want to increase the membership of your village? Do you want to increase who those members are? Do you want to increase where funds come from? What's driving you to do that? What are those things? What are the restraining forces? What's keeping that from happening? What assets that you already mapped, because you've been out there asking people, what assets are required to make that happen? And what are the steps that you need to get there? Having said all of this, thanks for all you do. It's a pleasure to be here. Steve, Barbara, anybody has questions? I'm glad to take them. And by the way, I'm glad to answer questions about grant making or grant receiving, if that would help folks as well. So you're getting a double here.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you, Michael. I'm waiting for questions to come in, but we do have Arlene. She has raised her hand, so I'm going to bring her over and she can talk to you. And you have to unmute.
Arlene looks like she's on mute.
I just got her. I asked her. Oh, there she goes.
Oh.
Arlene?
All right, so while we're waiting for Arlene, let me give a shout out to folks. I was glad Carol talked to you about foundation seeking and proposal writing. For those of you who might attend the American Society on Aging conference every year, Grantmakers in Aging, which is the association of funders in the field of aging, has an annual workshop, which is called Meet the Grantmakers. If you're there, you are certainly welcome to participate in Meet the Grantmakers, in which actual people making grants are there to talk about what they need in order to make grants to you. Thank you, Katie, by the way, for your comment. And what we try to do is we try to actually speak from position of people who make grants to the kinds of questions that people might actually have about approaching foundations. Things like, what do you need to look for when you're looking for matching funds? What do you need to look for when you begin to research which foundations to go to? This, by the way, is all part of your asset mapping approach. When you start thinking about how do I get the assets that I need to move forward my particular organization. So,
I still am having a problem with Arlene, but it might be my computer. Steve, you want to try to unmute her? I don't know.
I did. My gut is because her hand's not raised anymore that she just raised it on mistake.
No problem. So there's a question in the comments. How do you obtain the Build Community book?
So I would go to the ABCD Asset-Based Community Development Institute at DePaul University. So the ABCD Institute is the organization of people who work in this field for a long time. I came to become a fellow, become a steward, formerly a faculty of the ABCD Institute, by working directly with Jody Kretzmann and John McKnight, who wrote the book, Communities from the Inside Out. And there's a whole publication section there. There are about now 60 stewards or faculty members from around the world, actually. And the book that I showed earlier is the seminal text and how Build a Community is listed on there. So just go to ABC.
I just dropped in the.
I just dropped it too.
Thanks. Okay. There you go.
Great minds think alike.
Thanks.
Well, good. And then I think we have another question. What is the percentage of funding that goes into older adult issues? Ballpark, are there foundations that really focus on that field, or?
Yes. So the percentage of funding, it's hard to calculate, but in general, only about 1% of all foundation funding goes to specifically older adult programming. Now, Americans are really generous people. Last year, according to Giving USA, we gave in contributions about $500 billion. Of that, about 12% come from foundations. So 12% of $500 billion is about $600 million. About $6 billion come from foundations. And of that, about 1% is about $60 million. It's about, 6 billion, about $60 million. At the Chicago Community Trust, I had a budget of about $40 million. So the Chicago Community Trust was the largest funder in the field of aging. And sorry, my screen just got obscured. If I'm doing the math right. So when Carol was talking about reframing, what she was really referring to was a project that Grantmakers in Aging undertook about 8 or 9 years ago through the Reframing Institute, which is an organization which helps fields rethink how they present themselves to the world. So the Harrington Weinberg Foundation, where I work, largest funder in the field of aging, several years ago stopped making specifically grants in the field of aging, but rather made their grants which go to aging organizations or to benefit older adults through their mostly health or housing grant making sector. You're still aware that they're making grants in the field of aging. In fact, the charter of Weinberg Foundation requires that a third of the money each year go to funding in the field of aging. They're just put under a different kind of category. It'd be really good for folks to get a hold of the reframing study that was done for grant makers and agents to help you think about how to position yourselves more effectively. Again, all of this is part of the whole way of thinking about how do you get to the assets in the community that you can use. And the way to do that, one way to do that is to use that action analysis chart that I was talking about at the very end of my presentation, and to use an asset mapping approach in what we call the gift survey, which could include the way that you actually get to talk to your local funders by not saying, oh yeah, I want to talk to you about how you can make a grant to me, but rather how you envision what this community could look like and what your role as a funder, as a provider of assets can do for the community in which we actually live. So I see a couple of questions, by the way, one of which is, some of us wonder if getting a grant is a bit of a risk since it may not be.
I was gonna bring that up.
Yeah, so if it's, as a funder, it was my responsibility to say to people, well, what are you gonna do when our money runs out? And the wrong answer was, we're gonna ask you for more money. The right answer is to say, we are looking at the assets which can be brought to the table in this community in order to move forward the big picture plan that we've developed for our particular organization or with our village and with the members of our village, right? And this is how we're thinking about the future. It's not wrong to say, we're thinking that we might be able to get you to fund us for some portion of the future. It is wrong to say that that's the only thing that we're looking for. It's always a risk. Foundations are private organizations. And what they're trying to do is fulfill their needs. Now, your needs and their needs might intersect, and might overlap, but they're not necessarily the same thing, right? Each program officer has to go to their board and say, this is why I want you to fund this particular project, because it meets the needs of the foundation charter or its mission or its value statement. So I hope that answered your question. I'd love it if we could take people off of silent, off of mute, and we could actually talk, if that's possible.
Steve, that's you.
Well, okay, if we want to give this a shot, what we can do is that if you want, if you raise your hand, your virtual hand, I can bring you over and we can have sort of a, we can finish this off with a little bit of a house party. And okay, so let's see. But I don't see any hands raised yet.
One just raised. I saw somebody.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so what I'm doing is, folks, I'm moving you over to panelists. And then when you get over there, you can turn your mic and camera on. But you've got to click the button when I tell you you're going over.
So while we're waiting on that, I have a quick question.
Sure.
So running a village back in Virginia, I competed with a lot of nonprofits. I mean, the Richmond, Route 1 was Mecca, from Old Town all the way down. Every nonprofit in America was there. How do we show that we're as needy as the homeless and the hungry and the children? And I mean, there was like such a great demand. And when you say, oh yeah, well, we're going to do this for their older folks, they're like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, right.
So I love the way you frame the question, Barbara, because I think it's really important that we understand that by positioning ourselves as needy, we surrender our power.
Okay,
right?
Yeah.
And what we're really trying to do is we're trying to present ourselves as being essential to the smooth or well-running of the larger community itself. When foundations make grants to homeless shelters, right? What they're doing is they're making a short-term investment to reduce what they might perceive as community investment. What you're doing as part of a village is that you're building the community in a way that will ultimately help people avoid the consequences of things like homelessness. And so the issue isn't we've got worse statistics than you do. The issue is presenting yourself as meeting an essential, as playing an essential role in making the community stronger, one that foundation would be proud to be part of. By the way, the only, frankly, source that I use when I was both a program officer and now as a private consultant to track down foundations is the Foundation Directory Online. Foundation Directory Online. And you can buy an online subscription for, I think it's about 20 or 30 bucks a month now for the basic subscription. They have a taxonomy. It's put out by the Council on Foundations. They have a taxonomy of about 500 plus points that allows you to sort of figure out what variables you might use in order to find the right foundation that might fund you.
What was it called again? The Foundation?
Foundation Directory Online. Foundation Directory Online. Who was it that a little bit earlier when Barbara was talking, somebody mentioned the Foundation Center libraries. Most of the regional associations of grant makers have a Foundation Center affiliated library, either within them or at a local library where you can go and see annual reports. Although for the most part, everything is done online these days. So a lot of my work now is helping steer people to that kind of a resource, right? Another community asset.
Great. Well, since we had two brave people take you up on your offer, let's get to know who they are. Katie, what village are you from?
Thank you. I just want to thank Michael. This has just been really inspiring. I'm Katie Brandon, the new executive director of Pasadena Village in California.
Great to meet you.
And Mara, where are you from? What village? Oh, unmute yourself there, Mara.
I'm from Parkland Village in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
All right.
Love Albuquerque.
Yeah.
Great.
I want to, by the way, answer a question I heard about whether or not California foundations have stopped funding and aging. I don't know where that information is from. There are several large and well-respected California foundations that continue to proudly fund in the field of aging. SCAN, for example, and Archstone, both in Long Beach, California. Now, they may not fund your particular village, and they may not, or their particular requirements at the moment might not include funding village or villages. But it doesn't hurt to look at what they're actually doing at any particular moment. So.
Great.
Good.
All right.
Karen, where are you from?
Oh, we've got.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to get in on this, please.
Oh, no problem.
Oh, okay. Oh, here we got another person. And who's that on the bottom of the screen?
Alice or
Alice?
Leilani. Leilani is a new member.
Oh, okay. What village are you from, Leilani?
We are at the just starting to sit down together and have conversations stage. And it is a very formative time in Davis, California.
Oh, nice. You know, we are just, you know, the name of a village could be, we are just starting to sit down together.
Leilani, using an asset mapping approach might be exactly the kind of thing you could use to launch a village effectively. And what it does is it allows you to go out and ask people questions about what they can actually gift to the community, and then using an action analysis approach to figure out what steps you need to take to put that village together.
I was thinking the same thing. You're being introduced to these concepts by you seems like it's very apropos.
Great. So feel free to be in touch, and we can talk about how to move that forward, or use the Communities from Inside Out book, which you can get from the ABCD Institute, actually.
Now, I have a question.
Sure.
About this asset-based approach to community development. It seems so sound, it seems really strengths-based, and also somehow it seems, I don't want to be catastrophizing, but it seems a little dissonant with my awareness of the times that we are in. And I have a sense when I think about community building and the challenges of community development, that we are in a time of climate and infrastructure and democracy instability in a way that was not the case even 15 years ago. And I'm wondering what you can say about the thinkers who have, who are in the development of that world and those theories, how those theories are adapting with this new level of instability.
Okay. So one of the things I would do is refer you to ABCD in Action, which is a website in which those very thinkers engage in constant online discussion about those exact topics. Actually, the ABCD Institute has a weekly, sometimes multiple times a week, discussion about the kinds of things you're talking about. We are in potentially catastrophic times, absolutely. But that argues for all the more reason to create structures like villages, which allow people to act in the interest of mutual support in moving ourselves forward. I live in a exurban neighborhood north of the city of Raleigh. My neighbors are increasingly raising chickens for eggs. I would say that most of the eggs we eat in our house, and we eat a lot of eggs, come from our neighbors, with whom we barter for eggs or vegetables that they grow in their gardens. This was not the case 2 years ago, Leilani. This is a response. This is a response of mutual support in catastrophic times. And I think we see this increasingly. Remember the example that I gave about intergenerational indigenous gardens in Reno? Well, one of the things we know is that when people move away from historic diets, they often suffer diseases of nutrition or lack of nutrition. If you look at what's happened to African-American neighborhoods in inner cities following the Great Migration, you saw extraordinary spikes in obesity and diabetes and other nutrition-related diseases. In part, that's because people moved into neighborhoods which were, to use the often used phrase, food deserts, in which they lost access to the food that they were historically accustomed to, right? If you ask Jewish people are accustomed to heavy fat and heavy salt diets, so I'm not sure it's a good example for me anyway. But in fact, when people started creating their own community gardens, which had historically foods and grew foods that they were historically accustomed to, you saw shifts in nutrition in those neighborhoods. Those are mutual enterprises, just like villages are. And the way you get to those is by doing things like gift surveys in the neighborhood. And by gift, I don't mean writing a check, obviously. What I mean is by what can people actually do to make that neighborhood work? What we've done in Reno is we've actually been able to get older indigenous people, Native Americans, to begin to talk about the kinds of foods that they learned how to grow when they were young people. And they've come together with young people high school kids to begin to plant gardens, which include foods that they were eating as young people themselves when they lived in communities that were by and large indigenous. And as a result, you're seeing we're already seeing improvements in nutritional health that people are having because they're working together to create food palettes, food that they're accustomed to. Those are mutual support activities, which are the result of people saying, I know how to grow squash. I know how to prepare particular types of tomatoes. My family has grown maize in this particular way for generations, right? We know how to prepare that. And we're going to teach you kids how to do that. These are all mutual enterprises, and that's what I'm talking about. It's a great question, Leilani. So go to ABCD in action. Enjoying some of the conversations. They're extraordinary, actually. Anything else? More tips about getting funders to love you?
Let's see. Sonia, you may have your hand up by mistake, but I'm going to ask you to...
I really have something to say.
Sure.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
This is for Leilani, and thank you for the wonderful presentation. Hi, Barbara. Leilani, I live in Contra Costa County, about an hour or so away from Davis. My daughter's in Sacramento area. I am thrilled that you're starting a village a day or thinking about it. I would be so happy to meet you a little bit in the future. I'm part of the VTV mentoring group as well, just so you know that. But just wanted to offer that to you.
Thank you so much. I'll note that down. Thank you.
Sonia, by the way, one of the first asset-based projects I ever worked on was in Pittsburgh. In
Pittsburgh, California or Pennsylvania?
Oh, no, California.
Okay, that's only half an hour away from me. Yeah. So, Clayton Valley Village has been one of the, well, I don't know, I've been around about 7 years or 8 years, including going to Beacon Hill Village when I was first, thinking about our village. So
this was a gift survey that took place just now. This is exactly what I was talking about. So.
Well, great.
I think we're winding down. I think this has been
this
good.
is fantastic. Well, thank you everybody for your contributions. And what a great first day.
Yeah, thank you all. Michael, many, many thanks. We know it was a tough day for you, but we're with you.
Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. See you
Tomorrow,
later. This is a great conference.
We'll have a pop in and listen. We have a full day tomorrow. We look forward to seeing everybody. Enjoy your evening.
Okay.
All righty.
Thank you.